All right. Good day, everyone in Colorado. Good morning for those of you in the Pacific time zones.
Hold on 1 second, Steve. Okay, we're ready.
All right. Good day, everybody. If you're in Colorado, it's high noon. If you're on the Pacific time zone, it's still morning. Friends of ours who are in Moscow who might be watching this, it's 9 o'clock at night. So welcome to the Denver Museum of Nature and Science Division live programming. It's Monday morning, Monday noon. I'm going to talk today about a collection that's been at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science for about 35 years. And it's a world-class collection of gem carvings by a man by the name of Vasily Konovalenko. And a few years ago, I published a book on Vasily Konovalenko and his work, the gem carving sculptures, what they are, what they represent, what they mean, why they're here in Denver, Colorado. And since then, I've been involved in working with Russian colleagues at the Kremlin Museum to put on an exhibition of his work. And then most recently, working on a documentary film with filmmaker Erica O'Connor about this wonderful artist, his art, his life, and his times. So I'm going to take about 20 minutes today to share this with you. I'm going to share a screen here, call up my PowerPoint presentation. And here you can see the cover of the book that I wrote. It's called Stories in Stone, The Enchanted Gem Carvings of Vasily Konovalenko. Now, for American eyes, you look at this sculpture and you can see that it's three men that are probably partying, having a good time, but it's difficult to understand what this sculpture represents because the styles are not American styles. The hats are from a particular time and a particular place that doesn't resonate well with most American eyes. And so I want to share with you some background information about this guy, his art, and the meaning of these sculptures, and then share with you a really cool project that we're engaged in going forward. And now, there we go. All right, so what are the Konovalenko gem carving sculptures? These are sculptures that are carved entirely out of gemstones. So this includes precious and semi-precious stones. There may be diamonds in the eyes or in jewelry on some of these people, but really these are semi-precious stones, agates and jaspers and things like that are carved into whimsical figurines. And there's no painting on these. So I chose this guy. He's called the painter, but there's so much detail on this guy that you have to keep in mind that none of the details on this are painted on by the artist. These are the beard, the eyes, and I'll show you close-ups in just a minute. The paint spatters are all natural flaws in the stone that Vasily Konovalenko took advantage of in his work. I want to point your eyes down to the barrel of paint that's on the floor. And if you look to the right of that barrel of paint, you will see some ripple marks. Those are caused by tree rings. This is the base here is a piece of petrified wood, 60 million, 100 million year old petrified wood. I don't know how old it is exactly, but the tree rings on this piece of petrified wood are still visible in this cross section of petrified wood. And what Konovalenko did is made it look like the base on which this guy is standing is covered with a canvas, and then he's got his bucket of paint that is sort of pushed over to the right on the canvas, and what you see are those ripples from when a blanket or a canvas, a drop cloth, gets wedged together. And this is an indication of the kinds of genius that Konovalenko had. Here is a close-up of the man's face, and again, you can see his beard is made out of flaws in the stone. The little looks like a paint spatter on his nose. It doesn't look like a flaw in the stone. It looks like he got too much brown paint on his nose and then paint on the eyes. And what's interesting about this piece is that Konovalenko modeled this after a man who painted his apartment in Moscow in 1962 and had a little too much to drink while he was doing the paint job. So Vasily left in the morning, left this guy to do his work, and he comes back in the afternoon, and this guy's got paint everywhere, including all over his face and so on. But it's a whimsical, wonderful creation. And again, none of this is painted on. This is one of my favorite photographs of a Konovalenko sculpture because it's a detail of his hand and the paintbrush and his sleeve that's been rolled up and his apron and so on. And you can see the paint spatters on his hand. That is all natural flaws in the stone. Same with his apron, same with his shirt. And look at how he's rolled the cuff up on the shirt around his right wrist, right arm, that looks just like somebody's shirt, my shirt right now that I've just pushed up on my arm. The man was able to make stones look like fabrics. And then all the way in the back, I want to point your attention in between the two straps from his apron that go up around his neck. Look in the middle there, and you can see that Konovalenko has etched in a little button on the man's shirt, just a circle there. It's not a full-on button, but it's a circle for where the button would have been. Not much escaped Vasily's attention, incredible attention to detail, and it's all done with stone. So in the short presentation I want to give you today are several take-home points. Before I get into those, the characters down below are three faces from the sculptures at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. A prisoner on the left, again, his 5 o'clock shadow, his beard is all from flaws in the stone. It's not painted. We've got a woman who's jumped into an icy pond in the middle there, and then the guy eating a slice of watermelon on a hot summer day. Whimsical, thoughtful, theatrical, really cool faces carved out of stone, stories carved out of stone. So the take-home points for us, and this is all detailed in my book and will be detailed in the documentary film that we do, is that Konovalenko resuscitated an incredibly popular Russian art genre that ended at the Russian Revolution in 1917 when the Soviet governments shut down Karl Peter Fabergé's workshops that created lots and lots of Russian gem carvings. So, Konovalenko gets working in the 70s. He really resuscitated a well-known art genre that the Russian Soviet people loved and we're happy to see come back. As we'll see, his background in making set designs for operas and ballets and so on is important because he doesn't make static soldiers and static figures standing at attention. He makes people that are dynamic and doing things. Another point, and with all due respect to my beloved friends in Moscow at the various museums, the Denver collection of Vasily Konovalenko's gem carving sculptures is undeniably the world's best. He created 20 fantastic sculptures. He was at the pinnacle of his career, spent his time learning from the greats in Russia, but then came to the US, and our collection is supreme. And then there's a whole notion that Vasily could see through the stone, and really the better metaphor is probably feel through the stone. But again, he had an amazing talent for being able to take advantage of natural flaws in the stone with which he was working. So his background starts in the theater. He's a set designer working on ballets and operas at the world-class Mariinsky Theater in St. Petersburg in 1957. And at that point, he had to make his first gem carving sculpture, and I'll show it to you in a minute, but it was for a ballet called The Stone Flower. Highly improbable that this man would end up carving gem sculptures, but he did. As a set designer, he starts in this new genre for himself. He has a major exhibition at the Russian State Museum in 1973 that the Russian people loved. And then in 1984, a new exhibition of his work appears here at the Denver Museum of Natural History, as it was then known. And then in 2009, I started working on this project. I'm an archaeologist. What do I know about Russian gem carvings? Well, now I know a whole bunch because I've been working on it for a while. But what I loved about these sculptures is how different they were from anything else that I had seen. And they weren't really well documented within the museum context. So I set out to change that and get these things documented. So the Stone Flower was the ballet that Konovalenko produced some gem carvings for in 1957. And this is where he got his start in gem carving sculptures. You can rent the Stone Flower on Netflix. It is an amazingly Russian ballet, but every Russian knows what it is. There's the Mariinsky Theater down there on the lower left. We got into the inside of this amazing, amazing theater last year and filmed some in there. But that's where his start is. And many, many, many Russians, most Russians will know of this ballet. They certainly know of Prokofiev, and they certainly know of the Mariinsky Theater. Here is the gem carving sculpture that Vasily first made in 1957. And it's a carving of Danila, the master, who's a stone carver himself. And I'm not going to go into too much of this detail, but again, if you go into certain parts of Russia, Danila is really, really well known. Sort of like a Paul Bunyan figure, if you will, in the United States and the upper Midwest and things. It's a folk character who is really, really well known. So Konovalenko, as a set designer, creates this work and falls into a niche in which Russians really wanted gem carvings back, and they all knew some of the characters that he was working on. He then works on his own for 16 years, and his wife pushes him to do an exhibition at the Russian State Museum. It's the Russian State Museum for a reason. This place is absolutely magnificent. It's up in St. Petersburg. That exhibition was incredibly well received by Russians at the time, really, really popular. And there were problems with it that I won't go into here, but it led to some persecution and things like that. But it was incredibly well received. Here's one of the gem carving sculptures that he made for that exhibition, or that he made in the 16 years prior to this exhibition. But again, most Russians will recognize this scene. Most Americans will not. This is called The Fox and the Beaver, and the people are appropriately named. But it's a man and a woman, apparently a wealthy man and probably a much younger woman at his side. But this is a folk tale in Russia, and it's well known. So people would have seen this image, and boom, they would have known what Vasily was carving. I want to show you a detail from this. Look at the cane that he made for this man. It's made out of carnelian birch. The level of detail on this is absolutely incredible. And if they were still making canes like that, I'd buy one. That is just an element of style right there that we've lost. But the shoes are made out of obsidian, which cultures all over the world use to make chipstone tools. Agates, jaspers, all kinds of different things go into one of these sculptures. Here's another one that was on display. This is a favorite theme of Vasily's. This is two women having tea in a pond. They're cooling off in summertime, so they've got a floating or a standing table there in the pond, and they're just sitting there enjoying tea and talking, enjoying themselves on a hot summer afternoon. And this is a theme. Vasily worked very, very hard, but he liked his relaxation. So he has a lot of sculptures of women talking and men fishing and so on and so forth. But if you look at the close-up of the faces on these things, these women are dynamic and incredible. She's blowing across the bowl of tea. She's got a lump of sugar in her hand and a pearl necklace. I mean, how adorable is that? Carved out of stone. And then there's her friend over here. She's taking a sip out of her tea. The sugar cube is floating there. Again, very, very expressive, dynamic. You can see the thoughts going through her head as she listens attentively to her friend. Here's one of my personal favorites, though it's not a happy scene. This one is in the State Gems Museum in Moscow now. It's called Bereaved Mother. And this is a woman lying over the tomb of the unknown soldier after World War II. And it's hard to see, but down there on the plate, the front of the casket, if you will, I've forgotten the word now, the tombstone, you can see 1941 to 1945 etched in there, and that is clearly the dates for World War II. And as we zoom in on the woman, you can see she's a ghastly white. Her shawl looks like a characteristically Russian shawl from certain villages over there. You can see the mosses that he did. This one is so poignant and so terrifyingly sad that it's one of my favorites. And if you look closely underneath her eyes, there are flaws in the stones that look mildly like tears coming out of her eyes. And he didn't spend a lot of time with details on her face because he didn't need to. The message is clear what's happening here and what's going on. But an absolutely exquisite sculpture that he made. Here's another one. It's called Lickbez, or Liquidation of Illiteracy, and it's a Red Army soldier teaching 3 peasants how to read after the Russian Revolution in 1917. And again, amazing photo. Look at the expressiveness in this man's face. He's eager to be learning, and just a remarkable piece in its own right. So 1981, the Konovalenko family emigrates to the United States. They moved to New York, where Anna Konovalenko's brother had been living for some years. And for 3 years, they arrived on April 16, 1981. For 3 years, they're sponsored by some diamond dealers and medical supplies dealers and so on. So for just about 3 years' time, Konovalenko spent a huge amount of work, effort to make 20 sculptures for the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. And you'll see this donkey down here. That's here at our museum. I'll show you an image of that in just a second. Here is the exhibit as it stands here at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. Everything in pedestals. You can walk around them and so on. Here is the only sculpture of the 60 or so that Konovalenko ever made. This is the only one with an American theme to it, and it's gold prospectors. So it's 2 men up in the Colorado mountains prospecting for gold. Again, traveling back in time, as was Konovalenko's theme. But here's a profile of that donkey. Just an amazing donkey, and it's one of the few animals that Konovalenko ever carved. He just didn't do a lot of animals, but this thing is exquisite. and amazing and cool and expressive, and it's a donkey. Here is Bosom Pals, which is the cover of my book. This is quintessentially Russian theme, as I mentioned, and this is sort of the iconic Konovalenko sculpture, and it's here in Denver. You can see the details on their punch bowl. The decorations on the chicken punch bowl are cloisonné enamel, so it's a different medium than the stonework that he did, but he was able to excel at that as well. So after 1984, he's living in New York, and he has another 5-year period in which he's working for himself. He doesn't have any sponsors. He's selling his sculptures as he can, but he's working for himself. And in many ways, these sculptures that you're going to see now are in private collections, but they're some of the best that he ever made. And this one is called Gypsies, and it's two men. It's a man and a woman arguing because they've got a broken wagon wheel that's behind them. But the faces on these people, on the woman here, you can see her eye is made out of 3 different gemstones. Her tongue, her mouth is open. She's clearly yelling at the guy, and he's not having a whole lot of it. He's not real happy. But these are some of the finest pieces that he ever made. Look at the detail on the hand. Not only did he get the bones and the structure of the hand correct, but he got the veins correct. Absolutely amazing work. The hat is not carved out of a gemstone. It's gold-plated silver. So that was oftentimes the only exception to gemstone use that he had, is gold-plated silver. Really, really amazing. Here's another one from that late period in his life. It's called Lazy Workers. And this one is stylistically different from his others. It's not a lot of detail. It's much more stylized presentation, but equally dynamic and funny and all of that. And you'll notice the vodka bottle that's up in the upper right. These guys have worked maybe a morning and then had a little liquid lunch, and now they're taking a nice nap. It's an amazing piece. So here's another one from that late period. You remember the theme of the 2 women drinking tea. Compare this one to that one. Stylistically, technologically, this one is just a far superior piece. This thing is absolutely amazing. So you remember the expressive women talking. They're just much more dynamic. You can almost hear the conversation going back and forth between them. And then finally, one of the crowning glories that he made in the late portion of his career is Hippo. You'll see the big screen TV that's in the background of this shot. Hippo weighs 450 pounds, and it's a quartz base and malachite up there for the body. The tongue is ruby, and so on. This thing is just over the top in so many ways. And then, unfortunately, he had a stroke and cerebral hemorrhage, and then died 5 days later in January of 1989 at the age of 59. So this man still had decades worth of productivity ahead of him, and his life was cut short. So we don't know what could have been, but we can now honor and study and look at his legacy. So in 2016, the Kremlin Museum hosted an exhibition of his work, and you'll see this is a billboard. The Kremlin is in the back right. This is a billboard advertising that exhibition. And we actually lent 3 pieces to the Kremlin for that exhibition and then sent a delegation over to Russia. This is the scariest day of my entire career. All 3 sculptures that we lent are palleted and at the warehouse in Los Angeles, getting ready to be put onto an airplane and shipped over to Moscow. We go into the Kremlin and have a really good time. There's the Kremlin curator, Tatiana Munchin, who is the world's expert on Fabergé gem carving sculptures, as well as the Russian expert on Konovalenko gem carving sculptures. And this is us installing one of our sculptures into that exhibition. This is the exhibition as it stood. You can see the hippo there in the foreground, but 600,000 people visited this thing in just a few short months. So it's really, really popular in Russia as well. And then finally, the book was finished. The exhibition was finished in 2016. I thought this project was done. And then in 2017, I got a phone call from a woman named Erica O'Connor in Boulder, Colorado. And she said, I found your book. I bought your book. I read it in a day. I want to do a documentary film on Vasily Konovalenko and his works. And so last year, we traveled to Europe, and then we traveled to Russia to gather 2 weeks worth of interviews and film footage and so on for this effort. And before I turn things over to that project, I want to point out that the map that we're looking at in this museum in St. Petersburg is actually a map of the Soviet Union made in the 1930s for a World's Fair. And it is geographically to scale and geographically precise, and it's made out of gemstones. So it's a remarkable piece in its own right, and it's just testifies to the importance of this genre in Russian culture. So there is Erica on the left, that's me in the center, and then on the right is Corey Flintoff of National Public Radio. And some of you may remember Corey Flintoff from your years of listening to NPR in the 80s and 90s. His voice is distinctive. Even if you don't know the name, you'll recognize the voice, but he has agreed to narrate our film for us. So the film hopefully will be out next year. But in the meantime, what we're doing is posing a challenge to you all. Konovalenko sculptures are so wonderful and yet not very well known that in this time of the COVID pandemic and stay at home and safer at home and so on, we would like you to think about creating your own Konovalenko gem carving sculpture, not out of stone, but out of the materials that you can find in your own home. So the idea is don't go out and buy things, just find stuff that's around your house and you can create your own gem carving sculpture. So Memory, if we could turn this over to the video that Erica produced so our viewers can watch that, we can then come back and talk about that important, fun project for a few minutes. I should note also that at the end of this video, we talk about where you put the photographs. Don't pay attention to that yet because that will change. Pay attention to the Denver Museum's website and we will provide updates on where you can post your creations. But we really, really hope that you can join us in this fun artistic endeavor. Memory.
Yes, let me get that video up for you. Okay. Make sure.
So by way of background, there's a large contingent of people in the art community, both in Russia and in the United States, who have taken to reconstructing famous paintings. So think of any famous painting, the Mona Lisa, or some by really just any famous art out there, and then reconstruct it. And this is really taking off in Russia. And that's one of the reasons why we want to get some American contributions on Konovalenko's work. It's a really, really fun project, and some of the stuff that people come up with is absolutely fascinating. I saw one painting, a surrealist painting of a woman the other day, that instead of a woman creating herself to look like that surrealist painting, she made it out of slices of cheese and other kinds of food that she found in her refrigerator. And it was, you know, a spot-on imitation of the two things. It was really, really cool. Memory, should we just post the link? We'll go to questions.
Yeah, I have it right here. Just wanted to make sure everybody could see what I was seeing. Here we go.
Thank you.
I'm Erica, and I'm the director of the first feature-length documentary film about the life and art of the city of Konovalenko. Like you, I'm a big fan of this little film at the Denver Museum of Nuclear Science. In fact, the museum curator, Dr. Stephen Nash, accidentally lost him and interviewed dozens of people who were really story of this incredibly talented artist.
Okay, Steve, I don't think we're just going to post that link.
Right. So we'll post that link. I guarantee you it's a fantastic 2.5 minute video about this important project. But bear with us. We're all learning with this, the new webinar formats and all that kind of stuff. But please take a look at it and then contribute with your amazing artistic abilities to this really, really cool project. And we'll find a way to share it with our Russian colleagues. I've been in touch with colleagues at the Kremlin Museum, and they're all interested in doing this. So it would be a really, really cool thing to for us to play with together. So questions, thoughts, comments?
Yes, and I can read some off to you, Steve.
Okay,
Some
great.
questions we've had. So we have one from Jenna. Jenna asks, does the museum ever rotate out which items they have on exhibit?
So Jenna, it's a great question. The 20 gem carving sculptures that we got in 1989 after Konovalenko died, those 20 are on permanent display. So you can come in and see those anytime that you want. I will say that we have on temporary display 2 sculptures. One is Gypsies, which I showed you an image of. That was the man and the woman and the broken wheel. And then another one called Hunter on the Mark. And that one is, those 2 are in a private collection here in Colorado, and they're on display here at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science on a temporary basis, but they'll be up for a while once we get the museum going again. So yes, great question. And we do bring them, we don't need to rotate them because they're out all the time. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I have another question from Talia. Talia asks, what tools did Konovalenko use to shape the stones, running water and metal tools?
Yeah, yes, he used all standard gem and mineralogical equipment. So the jewelry industry and other kinds of industries have standard tools that are used for carving gemstones to make jewelry and other kinds of things. Konovalenko used all that material. He also invented some of his own tools for specialized needs. I will say that I've talked to his daughter is a good friend of mine now, and she says, I had a very strange childhood, because she says that she spent a lot of time doing rough cut polishing on a lot of these stones. So it's just standard mineralogical tools, as well as some material that he invented on his own. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. And I have one more question from Courtney. Courtney asks, how did this collection come to the museum?
Another great question. So the collection ended up here at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science because one of our trustees was in business with one of the sponsors. So a guy by the name of Jack Ortman, who was a diamond dealer in New York City. Ortman was one of those 3 sponsors that Konovalenko had early in his career. And so Ortman and the other 2 sponsors, they asked Konovalenko to create 20 sculptures under contract, but they didn't have a plan on what to do with them at the end of that 3-year period. And so our DM&S trustee worked out an arrangement by which those sculptures came here to the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. And it's a long, complicated story. Short answer is a trustee connection, but it's a great question because I often quote Humphrey Bogart in this moment and say, of all the gin joints in all the towns in all the world, and they walk into mine. There's no real reason why the best collection of Russian gem carving sculptures should be here in Denver, Colorado. And that's all the more reason that we in Colorado and the United States should celebrate these things, because this is truly a part of world culture.
Awesome. That's all the questions I'm seeing for now, Steve.
That's fantastic. So folks, please keep your eye out on the Denver Museum of Nature and Science webpage. We will post the link to the Stories in Stone Challenge, as well as we can find information about the film that we're going to finish producing here, and Corey Flintoff is going to narrate, and so on and so forth. The Konovalenko story is not over, so stay with us and let's keep having some fun with it, okay? Thank you so much for your time.